you ever heard of a firefighter? They will risk their lives to save somebody. Now, if that isn't sensitivity to suffering and a determination to prevent it, I don't know what is.
Why is compassion so often misunderstood or even seen as a weakness?
Partly because compassion is often tied in with spirituality and religion. In reality,
Paul Gilbert, a pioneering psychologist and world-renowned expert on compassion, is the founder of compassion-focused therapy.
One of the things that I had maybe felt on this journey was my shadow emotions.
the shadow is the side that if it was seen, people would reject you. So we become frightened of it. We're DNA built. You didn't choose anything about your brain.
What difference have you seen in the last 20 years within the research of what compassion can bring to oneself?
Tanya Singer was one of the leading brain researchers, and Richie Davidson, and they've been looking at what happens in the brain when people engage in compassion and looking at all the changes and what happens in the brain when people practice compassion. So over a period of time, if you practice compassion, you actually change circuits in your brain. In reality, compassion is the motivation that will help us address the challenges we have in the world. Competitiveness won't. A lot of people say, well, what makes you compassionate? And I say, absolute rage.
We want to make sure these conversations get to as many people as possible. By following this show and leaving a review, you can help these conversations reach the people they need to. If you send a screenshot of your follow and review to @SarahAnnMacklin, I'll pick 3 of you to come down to the studio to meet me and the guest I'm interviewing and watch the recording live. In your email and message to me, don't forget to also let me know who you'd like to see on the show. Paul, thank you for placing that mug so perfectly. Welcome to Live Well, Be Well. I am honestly so thankful to have you here.
Sure, it's a joy to be here. Thank you, Sarah.
It is, every now and again, I get a guest that comes on that I feel a very deep connection with. And a lot of my work over the last couple of years has been really rooted in compassion. For probably one of the reasons that I lacked it for so much of my life. And understanding much more about self-compassion and compassion in general made me realize that I actually needed to understand it to bring it part of my life. And now I talk about it very openly on this show to hopefully transition it to other people.
Yeah.
So I actually wanted to start with not defining compassion today, because we'll get on to this. But why is compassion so often misunderstood or even seen as a weakness today?
I think because people don't understand it. I think the whole lot of reasons, really, partly because compassion is often tied in with spirituality and religion, and that's okay. But also the idea that compassion is really about almost being submissive, giving in. It's sort of a kind of forced kind of forgiveness. So there's a huge amount of misunderstanding. In reality, as we will discuss, compassion is the most courageous and wise of all human motivation. It is the motivation that will help us address the challenges we have in the world. Competitiveness won't, but compassion will, because it's focusing on the addressing of the suffering and the causes of suffering. That's basically what compassion is. Now, if you've got the compassion and wisdom to do that, then that's compassion.
And why do you think, I guess, in the kind of the Buddhist terms, the Eastern philosophy, Buddhism has been around for thousands of years, but it's really only kind of come to the forefront in the scientific field in the last 20 years. Why do you think there's been such an extreme gap for so long and we haven't taken compassion seriously?
That's a great question, Sarah. So a couple of things really is because certainly in the psychological sciences, they've always wanted to be a science, they all want the evidence and all of that stuff. And working on something that's really was originally developed from meditation and observation of one's own mind, they thought that was not really interesting, very nice, but it's not really science. Science is studying, putting it under the microscope. So that's been the approach of a lot of psychological science. But it's in the last I suppose 20, maybe 30 years that a group of scientists got together with the Dalai Lama and they formed a organization called Mind and Life, which people can go and have a look at. And that was dedicated to the scientific study of the impacts of things like meditation and compassion. So it has been taken a while for these collaborations to get going, but they are going very well now. And we are beginning to understand that the way in which we work with our own minds is quite important to how we feel. But it has taken the time because psychology and psychological sciences wanted to be scientific and study it from the outside, not the inside.
And have you seen, I mean, you're kind of the pioneer of a lot of this research, and I've had Dr. Kirsten Neff on who introduced us as well around compassion. What difference have you seen in the last 20 years kind of within the research of what compassion can bring to oneself?
Oh, it's been terrific. I mean, there was Tanya Singer was one of the leading researchers, brain researchers, and Richard Davidson, and they've been looking at what happens in the brain when people engage in compassion, and looking at all the changes and what happens in the brain when people practice compassion. So over a period of time, if you practice compassion, you actually change circuits in your brain. This is called neuroplasticity. So you can actually change things in your brain by practicing compassion. So there's been a huge amount of research on the effects of in the brain. There's been a huge research program looking at what happens to your autonomic nervous system, to your immune system, and of course there's been increasing research that looks what happens to your moral behavior, so
Explain
compassion.
a bit more about moral behavior.
Well, taking an interest in others, being more empathic to others, being aware that humans are potentially we'll get onto this, one of my favorite hobbies, one of the most nasty, vicious species that have ever existed. Actually, if you look at our history, it's pretty horrible. And still today, we do some vicious, vicious things. So the ability to stand back from that and to look at that from a compassion point of view, how are you going to address the human harmfulness? For me, that's a fundamental issue about how compassion can help us, really.
Mm-hmm. Or be better humans and better species.
Yeah. Human, not man. Human. Humanity means compassion, actually.
So how would you describe compassion then? What would be, if I said to you, Paul, give me, which is very hard, give me one sentence to describe compassion, how would you describe it?
Well, I can make it a long sentence if that's okay.
It's always so hard when I get professors on here.
So look, the first thing is to understand motivation. Okay, it's a motivation. Okay, you're motivated, and all motives have two parts to them. There's what we call the stimulus awareness, and then there's the response. So if you're motivated to avoid threat, you need a brain that's going to be able to detect threat, but that's not enough. You also need a brain that will then say, do this, run away, or fight, or hide, or whatever. So stimulus and response are very important. Now, in the case of caring and compassion, the stimulus is a detection of suffering and need, and the response is to behave appropriately to address suffering and need. That's basically what compassion, that's the definition. Sensitivity to suffering in self and others with a commitment to do something about it. And it has to be appropriate. And therefore, compassion is not one thing, because, if you talk to the guys, when we talk to the guys who are a bit dubious about compassion, they say, well, we're not sure about that. And you say, have you ever heard of a firefighter? Yes. They will risk their lives to save somebody. Now, if that isn't sensitivity to suffering and a determination to prevent it, I don't know what is. That is, other forms of compassion are being compassionate when people are in emotional distress or standing up for injustice. Compassion is simply the determination to address suffering where it arises and not to be the cause of it. That's basically what it is. And that's why courage and wisdom are at the heart of compassion. Not softness, not submissiveness, not, just being kind and nice. Those are good things. It's a real courage and determination. We do not want suffering.
But there's a lot of suffering going on right now in the world. Do you think, or do you know, I don't know if there's any research, are we becoming less compassionate as a nation, more compassionate?
It's a mixed picture, isn't it? I think in some areas we're becoming more, in other areas maybe a little less. So again, the key thing with compassion is it's not one thing. You're not compassionate or you're not. It's compassion in what context, in what way. So I think in some areas we are becoming more compassionate. We're more interested in compassion. There's a lot more places now where you can train in doing compassion.
It is a challenge, but I think compassion, I think emotions in general are never taught to us. We might have, parents that might have awareness, and I think now maybe in this generation people are becoming more aware, but generally anything to do with our emotional health is not taught to us. So thinking about oneself with compassion, Are we born with a certain amount of compassion, and can we grow it like a muscle? How can one think about compassion kind of with evolution?
Yes, it's great. It's like all motives. There are some people that have more of it than others, that's for sure. It's like musical talent. There are some people who are, from a very early age are going to be, constant pianists, and there are other people like me who can spend years and years and can still only play chopsticks. And we know there are different, there's a hormone called oxytocin, and there are different types of oxytocin gene. The type of the gene does have an impact on compassion. So we know there are all kinds of differences, individual differences on people. Some are more compassionate than others, and some are more compassionate in some contexts, like people who will risk their lives to save others might not make the most compassionate partner or parent, for example. So these qualities vary. But yes, you can practice compassion. Now, interpersonal compassion, really one of the key things, if you want to be compassionate to other people, is learn to be empathic. And that means always ask the question, if that were me, how would I be with that? What would that be like if this were me, if this were me? Okay, and that's not a narcissistic position. It's really a position of understanding that suffering requires us to respond to it in a certain way.
A lot of people that I can see, and I started this off by saying, why is it misunderstood or seen as weakness? There's a lot, I think people fear compassion. There's a lot of vulnerability that can come with compassion because it's misunderstood. So for anyone that might feel slightly uncomfortable even listening to this conversation of thinking, well, how can I even be more compassionate to myself? What advice would you give there? And why do we have this innate fear around it?
Well, it's a great question because what is it about vulnerability or acknowledging vulnerability that makes somebody weak, right? I mean, if you are aware that your legs are a little bit as they are, and you want to go rock climbing, you're going to be very careful that you don't drop 20 feet. Otherwise, you're going to break your legs, right? To say, oh, well, I've got vulnerable legs, it's ridiculous. So the point about it is vulnerabilities and understanding vulnerabilities are knowing what a system can do and not pushing it beyond the levels that the system can focus on, right? So vulnerabilities are not about weakness. It's about intelligence. Okay, so actually I've got an issue with this, so I need to heal this, or I need to work on this, or I need to stop doing this because this is going to be harmful to me or harmful to others. So what we call vulnerabilities are really about a recognition of where our limitations are, okay, and what it is we need in order for us to deal with things in such a way that allows us to address suffering in ourselves and others. Now, sometimes when we're suffering, it does require us to do grief work. And that's often where people start thinking, oh, well, that's a problem. Now, grieving can be tricky because grieving is really designed as a social process, not to be done alone. The Greek tragedies are all about, the social communication of grief. And also, particularly for some of the guys, grieving is difficult because when you cry, you can't see, you can't breathe, you lose muscle tone, and then people just feel very, very vulnerable. They can't defend themselves. So there are some people who absolutely stay away from anything to do with sadness and grieving because it just makes them feel vulnerable in that way. So working with compassion is helping people see that compassion is also a healing process, but it does require a degree of wisdom and courage to work through that healing process. But vulnerabilities are really about also recognizing what it is you need to heal, if you can see what I mean. So, if you start, oh, well, when I start to engage in this, I just feel so sad, so I'm vulnerable. Actually, no, you need the courage to do that because sadness is a healing process, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I had maybe felt on this journey to becoming more aware of compassion was my shadow emotions. And Carl Jung talks about shadow emotions a lot. And I think that's where a lot of us can feel uncomfortable, right? It's where we can maybe have a bit of this resistance. It's where I think I found a lot of resistance. How important is it to be conscious of both of these signs when it comes to compassion?
Well, I think it's a wonderful question because there's a limit to the degree to which any human being can be conscious of the motivations that are going on within us. And we know that consciousness is actually quite late in the information processing chain. In other words, your brain's already decided on something, and then you can become conscious of what it's decided, right? So to be conscious of motivations is difficult. Now, the shadow is the part of ourselves that we don't want to acknowledge. It's the part of ourselves that threatens the persona. Now, your persona is the part of you that you want others to see, to like you, to love you, to think you're wonderful, blah, 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 blah. Whereas the shadow is the side that if it was seen, people would reject you. So we become frightened of it. We think it makes us a bad person or whatever. We're frightened of acknowledge things in us that others would condemn. However, as Nietzsche said, don't cast out your devils because they can be the strongest part of you. So let's think about what the shadow. Now, the shadows usually the things are to do things we're ashamed about, and the two big areas are, of course, the aggressive ones and the sexual ones, as Freud said, and sometimes the feeling of weakness or cowardness. Those are sort of shadow materials, things that we don't really want to acknowledge within us. But we're all plumbed in. They're all plumbed into us. We didn't choose them. And this is a big issue in CFT, as you know, that none of us built our brains. We're DNA built. You didn't choose anything about your brain.
And that's compassion-focused therapy.
That's
for people that don't know
therapy,
CFT.
Yeah. You got a very tricky brain. So learning that we are because if we come on to the Buddhist stuff, this will be able to talk a little bit more about this. You're basically a consciousness experiencing all the firings that are going on in your brain, basically.
As a nutritionist, one of the most common questions that I get asked is coffee good or bad for you? Yes, coffee is good for you, but the impact of the health benefits all comes down to how the coffee is sourced and made. What's really important to consider when choosing your coffee is knowing that not all coffee is created equally. I came across Exhale Coffee by Dr. Rupi, who oversaw 9 independent lab tests to ensure the coffee is sourced to maximize the polyphenol content. This is a potent antioxidant with anti-inflammatory properties to support overall health. Switching to a high polyphenol coffee like Exhale is also fantastic for your gut health and your brain health, because research has shown that these specific components may have a real impact on our immune response. It could even help support your oral microbiome when drinking up to 2 to 3 cups a day. But over 5 a day has been shown to have detrimental effects. Personally, I love to have my coffee an hour after waking up to allow my body to use its own natural energy resources within the first hour and to align with my circadian rhythm. What I also love about Exhale Coffee is that it's also soil certification organic certified, which means that it's free from mycotoxins, pesticides, and molds. Now, if you want to give your mornings a new routine and try Exhale Coffee, then head to www.exhalecoffee.com/Sarah to get your free trial sent to you.
Talk to me a little bit more about that, actually, because I think all of a sudden, maybe somebody hearing what you just said, you didn't choose this. Because there's a lot of shame and guilt that can go with starting to connect to the shadow side of ourselves.
Yeah.
It's very hard and it's very brave. So talk to me about that, because I think immediately that lifts a lot of resistance, or it does for me, just hearing that I didn't choose this, but I'm going to tackle it.
Well, what's happened is evolution has conned you. You are a victim of a con. What's the con? The con is this, that if you think about the nature of life and biological life, it took millions, billions of years to get going. The ingredients for life on this planet have been here a long time, and then it gets going. Then you have amoebas, little amoebas, and they become more complicated, and then you have more complicated species in the sea, and then they come on the land, and then eventually the mammals appear, and then they're all being built by DNA, and that DNA and those genes are changing over a period of time for 2 things only: reproduction and survival. Survival first, actually. That's it. And so these animals are being built with bodies and brains to perform functions, to detect threats, to go after resources, to reproduce. That's what they're built for. Okay? Now, the big question, which we'll come on to later, is how does that all relate to consciousness? Because that's the big question everybody's now asking. that does consciousness exist separate to the brain? Now, I personally am one of the people that think it does, but what that means is, and what scientists are now talking about, is that actually our brains are basically headsets within the field of consciousness. And that means you've got a headset that's been built for you. It's been designed over billions of years. You never chose it. But it's been designed to do things. It's been designed to fight when you need to fight, to be angry when you need to be angry, to be frightened and run away when you need to be frightened, to be sexual when you need to reproduce. You didn't choose any of that stuff. Not one motive, not one emotion did you choose. The issue for humans, however, is that about 2 million years ago, we suddenly became aware of all this stuff. Hang on a minute. I exist. I have thoughts. I have emotions. I have feelings. What's this all about? So then we start to try to make sense of what's this all about? Why am I having these feelings? What are these about? And unfortunately, some of the religious ideas about it, the nature of soul and all that, have really distracted us from the reality that you, like me, we're biological beings, that we are creating experiences, we're having these experiences in consciousness somehow, but we aren't the ones that created the headset. So, you think about it, all of the things that we think of shadow, all the things that cause us pain, like anxiety and depression, and none of us choose them. None of us wake up and think, you know what? I think I'll have some panic attacks. My life is too calm. I'm going to practice panic attacks. It doesn't happen. I'm going to practice suicidal depression because I'm too happy. It's not right, is it? No. All of those emotions come to us. Rage, hatred, they're all emotions that kind of can take us over because that's how they're built to do that. We don't choose them. We don't plan them. We don't practice those emotions. What we do need to practice is what's called mindfulness, is becoming aware, standing back from them and being aware that things are being triggered in us, often against our will when it's the shadow side, because we don't want to be anxious at times or we don't want to be raging at times. And then how do we work with them? But if you do, as you say, when you've got this sense of being a self-aware being, and then you claim them and you say, oh, even though I didn't, even it took billions of years to build this brain, I'm still going to blame myself for what I experienced. That's just, you've been conned.
I like that. You've been conned.
You've been conned. Evolution has conned you. It's giving you a sense of an individual self because you are a vehicle for genes for survival and reproduction, basically. So you evolved a brain that will give you a sense of yourself, this idea that it is about you, but it isn't.
So talk to me about mindfulness in this, because this was a big conversation that Neff kind of brought to the conversation this year as well. It's one of her 3 ways that she describes self-compassion. And mindfulness, again, has risen a lot, even in the scientific community, in the last 10 to 20 years. How can we approach this with compassion then? So somebody who is listening to this, what strategies should they be implementing or thinking about when it comes to mindfulness?
Well, there are different types of mindfulness and there are different reasons for being mindful, okay? So one form of mindfulness is to become aware of what's happening in your brain as it's happening, basically. Why do you need to do that? Because you never designed it. If you designed it, you'd know exactly how to do it, wouldn't you? You'd know where all the knobs and the whistles are and where the drawers are. You know it all because you designed it, but you didn't. So you're having to work out evolution's plan, and that means you're learning to be observant. Now, observing the mind allows you then to make a decision about how you want to go. The Dalai Lama always tells this lovely story. I remember I was in an audience, huge audience, thousands of people. And he said the first thing about mindfulness is the ability to pay attention to intention. When he was a younger man in Lhasa before the Chinese invaded, he used to like to fix wristwatches because the Dalai Lama loves gadgets, right? And we always used to joke that, his previous incarnation, he was a Swiss cuckoo maker. He wasn't really the Dalai Lama at all. But anyway, it's the story. So the story is that he would take these watches from travelers that were broken and he would see if he could fix them. And one day he had this beautiful watch and he'd more or less done it, and then he dropped a screw into the mechanism. And in that moment he went, "Huda!" which is Tibetan for, oh shit, and took a hammer and smashed the watch. And the audience went, oh, and then he smiled as he does. So you see, in that moment of mindfulness, I have done exactly the opposite of my true intention. My true intention was to create a beautiful watch, and now I have no chance of doing that. Mindfulness allows you to track your attention, to understand your attention, to track it for all the times that these other aspects of mind will pull you off the road, and they will. So when you have your intention, this is why compassion is so essential. When you have your intention is to address suffering where you see it in yourself and others, you will take a courageous and wise approach to whatever arises in your field of suffering. That's your intention. Mindfulness will now help you stick with that, to travel that road. So if you find yourself becoming self-critical or disliking yourself or raging or whatever it is, what would be the most helpful thing, given that I'm struggling, given that I'm in pain? What would really help me right now?
It's interesting, isn't it? It kind of, I wonder how many times that could pop up in one's head to really help bring the mindfulness conversation into practice.
Yes.
Having that intention,
Yes.
setting that intention every day.
Setting the intention every day. So in other words, you're learning not to blame, but you are learning to take responsibility. So I didn't choose to have a brain that can sometimes panic or get irritated quite quickly. But if I can notice it, then I can learn to work with it as would be helpful.
I like actually that you said that, because I think a big conversation that can be misconstrued, or that I probably used to think about as well, and it's a question that I get asked, is, but am I not going to be in self-pity with compassion? Or, am I not going to become a victim? Or is it not too soft? Like that's a lot of conversation that can come up when the word compassion is also in a sentence. And you said there, actually, it's a lot about the acceptance and the awareness of it. But then for me, the motivation comes to being able to see it, recognize it, and change it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Imagine you go into hospital and the doctor comes and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You've broken your arm. Oh my goodness me, I'm so sorry." And you say, "Well, I'm glad you're sorry, but would you do something about it, please? Can you help the pain? Can you sort out my arm? Can you fix my arm, right?" Sensitivity by itself is never enough. It's not. There's no point in just being sensitive and then collapsing in a heap and saying, "Oh, poor me." That doesn't work. I mean, we all do it. I'm sure I do it quite a bit. But this is why the two factors of compassion are so important: sensitivity, but also response. It's your response to the suffering that's absolutely crucial. And the response is not one of just, collapsing in a heap. I mean, you can do, because we all do that from time to time, but it's the dedication. I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah.
Without blaming, without shaming. I'm going to try to understand it. Because there's also a little bit of a narcissistic issue with, particularly in the West, that we do personalize. We think it's about us and so on. And it's very difficult for us to think, no, I'm just another clone. I should be here for whatever, 40, 50, 60 years, and then I'm off. And the world will be full of other human clones, and they'll last for 50, 60, 70 years. And then another. We're all clones. We're all built by DNA to feel, to think, to want, to strive. We're here for a while and then we're out. So we are feeding experiences into consciousness. That's what we're doing. It's not about an individual self. That's an illusion that evolution wants you to believe in. That it's about you. No, it's not.
Well, you talk a lot about the compassionate self versus the compassionate mind.
Yeah.
Can you break these down for me?
Okay, so the compassionate self is the self that you work in the Buddhist tradition. It's called bodhicitta. It's the self that you want to be. It's your idea, the kind of person you want to be. How do you want to live your life? What values do you want to live to? Do you want to be a person that doesn't care, as long as they get what they want and make as much money as they want? And there are certainly people like that. Or are you a person that thinks, actually, while I'm on this journey, whatever it means, wherever it's going, I'm going to recognize that the reality of biological life is horrific. It's horrific. I mean, all life forms have to be other life forms. And I mean, there's diseases, and we just arrive here and then we discover we're not going to be here for very long. Then we have to face losses and griefs and everything. So we know that life is full of suffering. All right. So while I'm here in this life full of suffering, what is it that I could do to help. And that's, for me, the key issue of an identity. That's what I want. Okay, I want to understand this nature of suffering. Why do we suffer? And I want to see what I can do to help. The next thing's compassionate mind. Okay, but it's like I want to climb Mount Everest or I want to run a marathon. Unfortunately, if you look at my body, you realize I'm not in any state to do that. So I need the body to run the marathon or to climb the mountain. So I'm going to have to train my body to do what I want it to do. So your compassionate mind is a way you train your mind in order for it to do what you want it to do. So I want my mind to be able to help me live a life of compassion where I try to the best I can to address suffering where I see it and certainly not be a cause of it, because it's easy to be a cause of it, isn't it? But I need a mind that's going to be mindful. I need a mind that can ground itself. I need a mind that has wisdom, that understands what's going on and doesn't get caught up in blaming myself for things that really are not my fault. I need a mind that has some degree of courage about it so that, when people are critical or ridicule what I do, I have to be able to stand up against that. So I need a mind. I need competencies and abilities and strengths to be able to live to my identity, the identity I want.
So the compassionate mind I'm now interpreting as the manual.
Yeah, it is. It's your training manual, yeah.
The manual to your intention of what you want to be as one.
Yeah, it's the same. If you wanted to be a musician, okay, you want to be a famous, or you wanted to be a tennis player, what are you going to do? You've got to learn the game. You've got to learn, if you're going to be a musician, you've got to learn the chords, you've got to learn how music works, and you've got to practice, right? So there's nothing that strange about it. But people think, oh, well, when it's an identity like compassion, it's just natural. No, you can train at it and you can get better at it.
I'm so excited to share something that has been a game changer for my business. As a nutritionist and a health professional, having an online presence that truly represents my brand is crucial. I built my website on Squarespace nearly 10 years ago now, and I'm so excited to partner with Squarespace and share with you the all-in-one platform that helps entrepreneurs and health professionals like us thrive online. Now, when I started to think about building my website, I was a bit overwhelmed. Now, you don't need to worry, because the Squarespace Blueprint AI makes it easy. It feels like having a personal design assistant guiding me through creating a site that looks professional and uniquely tailored to my brand. It's been amazing for showcasing my services and connecting to you, my audience. One feature I love is the members sites. I've set up exclusive sections for my inner circle members to access premium content like courses, recipes, books, and expert blogs. It's a fantastic way to offer extra value, build a stronger community, and generate steady income. And let's talk SEO. Squarespace has built-in SEO features to help make sure my website is optimized for search engines, making it easier for people to find my site and join my community. If you're a health professional or brand looking to elevate your online presence, I highly recommend Squarespace. It's been vital for growing my brand and making real impact. Check out squarespace.com/livewell for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, use the offer code LIVEWELL for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain.
Well, I love that, because people can probably take the analogy, and I talk about this a lot of compassion, that if you want to become a bit more hench or a bit more ripped or have abs, you can go to the gym and you can work and build your muscles. We all know that very well.
That's right.
I explain compassion very similarly. For me, I have built my compassion slowly over the years from training and doing different tools and understanding it a bit more to kind of build that compassionate sense within me.
Yeah.
So how can somebody listen to this build tools or understand more about their compassionate self? What would you advise them?
Well, we've got lots of exercises on our website. I'm allowed to say that, yes? Okay.
Of course you are.
We
We need to share this information.
Okay. So the first thing then, as a series of practice, what we call using the body to support the mind, right? So we know that compassion is linked to the organization of the autonomic nervous system, particularly your parasympathetic. So there are breathing exercises.
That's your rest and digest,
yes,
just so people know.
That's rest and digest, it is, yes. So there are breathing exercises that you can do that will bring your sympathetic nervous system into balance. Now that's important because your your autonomic nervous system into balance, because your sympathetic system is basically your go get, go do. And so that speeds up your heart rate and tightens up your muscles and pumps oxygen around your body. So that's action. That's action person. And that action can be in anxiety or anger, but it can also be in joy and stuff like that. If you win the lottery and you're worth millions tomorrow, you will get pumped up. Although I have to tell you a story when I was explaining to people how positive things pump up the system. And this client of mine I was seeing at the time said to me, he was paranoid, bless him, said, "Oh, no, Dr. Gilbert, think of all the people that want to come and steal your money. It would be terrible." So he thought winning the lottery would be awful because it would make him victim to people wanting to steal his money.
Although very interestingly, on that note, I know you're going to finish this, but an interesting part of the compassion story is people that win the lottery aren't always necessarily happier.
No, not in the long term. No, that's absolutely right. They get the buzz of dopamine for a couple of days or weeks, but then actually, not necessarily. Because the things that really make us happy are our relationships. It doesn't always help relationships. Okay, so that's, anyway, the sympathetic is, then you have a parasympathetic, and the parasympathetic is like the brakes on your car. It's the thing that will slow you down. So you imagine driving a car, and you can only control the speed of the car by coming on and off the brake, or maybe with the gears, but you didn't, on and off the accelerator, but you didn't have a brake. The parasympathetic system is very, very important, and that's why when we train the breathing exercises and certain other kinds of exercise, you're wanting to strengthen that parasympathetic because that is the one that will hold you. So if you're going off on one with anger or anxiety, if you've got a reasonably strong parasympathetic system, you'll be able to switch into that and that will hold you, okay, settles you. But if your parasympathetic system is relatively weak, which it can be if you've been traumatized or whatever, you're just off and it's very difficult to calm down. So using the body to support the mind. We also know that the microbes in your gut can have an impact on your vagus, right? So the diet, lay off the sugars and all of that stuff.
Yep, that's essential for the vagus nerve that you just mentioned, which is obviously from the stem of the gut microbiome all the way up into the brain, to the hypothalamus. Yep.
Yeah, so there are lots of things. I won't go into all of them, but lots of things, sound things you can do. But you're using the body. You realize that you need a body to sort of help you and support you. The next thing is understanding the power of your mind to control your body, right? So the example that we give would be something like, if you imagine yourself just laying in bed and then you start to have a worry come into your mind and you worry, what happens in your body? Do you notice? You start to heart goes up a little bit, starts to tense. Okay, let's switch that now and imagine that you're not worrying anymore, but you just suddenly remember somebody's really annoyed you and you think, your face will tighten up. If we could take measures, all your facial muscles will be tightening up, your muscles tighten up. So when you get angry, muscles tighten up. When you get anxious, they tend to go loose. But supposing you were laying in bed and you had a sexual fantasy, and you can do this, you just try it, at home by yourself, 10 seconds. The key thing about the fantasy is notice how quickly you notice changes in sensations in parts of your body, because your mind will actually change the blood flow of your body like that, assuming everything's working okay. That's extraordinary, actually, when you start to think about it, that you can literally change blood flow and sensitivity in your nerves simply by creating an image. Yes, you can. The point is, will it work the same if I use compassion imagery? Yes, it does. You can use compassionate imagery to start to stimulate compassionate systems in your brain and in your body. It's no different at all. Instead of having to think of a sexual thing, you think of a compassion thing. And you will practice. And over time, if you practice compassionate imagery, those systems in your brain and body will start to strengthen up. So what are compassionate images? I thought you were going to answer that, weren't you?
Yep.
All right. So there are a couple of these. The first, I must confess, there was a client that really helped me with this, because the first is to imagine yourself as a compassionate being, and then walking around, and we have a cartoon on YouTube you can see called Compassion for Voices, if you're interested. That explains it a bit. So you practice imagining yourself. It's almost like an actor stepping into a role, and you practice the role. And if I was this, then how would I speak? How would I think? What would I do? However, many years ago, because we've been doing this a long time, we were doing this with a lady, and she said, "Oh no, I can't do that, but I could imagine somebody being compassionate to me." I said, "Oh, okay." She said, "Well," she went off and she said, "I've got an image, and I spent time in a Buddhist monastery, and my image is a Buddha dressed as an earth goddess." She said, I can't really see it. I can't see a Buddha dressed in that way. I just have this sense of this being, and this being comes with real warmth and understanding and care for me, and that calms me down." She generated this compassionate image, and then she would learn to sort of call it when she needed it and speak to it, and so on and so on. And then actually, if you think about it, it's what religions do all the time, praying to God, you imagine God loving you and all that. So what you're doing is a little bit the same as a sexual fantasy. You're creating an interaction that's stimulating your body, but this is creating an interaction with the ideal compassionate other that you imagine yourself talking with or communicating with, the image of someone or a mind, if you don't want a person, that has complete empathy for you and understanding for you and wisdom, and says, "You've got a brain that you never chose. You are a human being coping with this, all this stuff. It's so hard. Let's go a step at a time." So your compassionate image has a way of being with you, and you practice relating to it in a way that you need to experience. And that in itself can be quite tricky for some people, but practicing imagining compassionate others being compassionate to you. There is a lot of visualization, although, as I mentioned with the lady I was talking about, she never actually saw anything. It was a felt sense. Now, the way you can think of felt sense and not without seeing, imagine walking through a dark forest at night. You have a feeling you're being watched.
Yeah.
You can't actually see anything. You might not even have any visions of who's watching you. Is it an animal, or is it a ghost, or is it another human being? It's a sense of something, right? And that can put prickles down even though you can't see anything, it can put prickles down as well. So the key thing when you're doing compassion imagery is you're sensing this motivation from another that wants to be there for you.
I think that's really powerful, because I think a lot of people's minds can spiral, or I relate to that in the evening when you're probably becoming a little bit more mindful. You're actually kind of calming your mind down to go to sleep, and actually this is when all of those thoughts maybe start to arise. Can we talk a little bit about, because I know that the power of this is profound, and I've looked at it a lot with food as well, that actually just how we think can change how we metabolize our food. Can you talk a little bit about what is happening in the brain? How is compassion having such a strong impact on our minds? What's going on neurologically there?
Well, there are lots of different systems. There's some parts of what is called the orbital frontal cortex, which orbital means just another thing. There are parts deeper in the brain. There are the amygdala, which is your threat system, has what is called oxytocin receptors, and the hormone oxytocin is involved with compassion. So there's lots of different things happening in your brain. Just like, if you have a sexual fantasy, lots of different things are happening in your brain. If you have a fantasy of going to tell somebody how much you annoy them, different things. So your brain will go into different states according to what you're focusing on. And yes, there are a whole set of identified circuits in your brain that are affected when you engage in compassion work, compassion imagery. But the imagery can be a felt sense. It doesn't have to be a clear picture.
And are our brains more neurowired than to be critical?
What an amazing question. I think it would be true to say that we are wired to pick up threat more than we are wired to feel up positives. Now, the reason for this is called better safe than sorry thinking. So if you're out, you can see this on the lawn, or those people who watch birds, for example, you put food out and they don't need very much to fly away. And they were under no danger, but they don't. So 9 times out of 10, they'll fly away when they didn't need to. The point is, or even 99 times out of 100, the point is you can't afford to miss the one. This is called better safe than sorry. So what it means is that our brains tend to be orientated to threat focusing first. And that can be a problem because it can also lead to catastrophizing. Supposing you have an argument at work. Supposing my boss sacks me, then I won't have any money. If I haven't got any money, oh my God, I won't be able to pay the mortgage. Oh no, then I'll lose my house and my family. So that threat sensitivity can do this. It can jump you from one thing to the next to the next. I mean, in a sense, people can see it's a sort of protective because it's warning you. But when it's in the human brain like that, it usually causes people a lot of hassle. So we are sensitive to threat, okay? And that tends to be a natural phenomena. It's like if you have 10 responses to your podcast and one of them is negative, which is the one you're going to ruminate on?
Well, now I won't ruminate on that.
Well, that's good.
But because I've trained myself.
You've trained yourself.
Because it's similar, right? When I think if you go through the day, this is how I started to really connect to it. There could be loads of things that happened that went really well. And if something went bad, I'd just remember that one thing.
Right,
and I would talk about it and talk about it. And then I realized from talking about it too much, I was just making it bigger and bigger and bigger that it didn't need to be.
That's right.
And so actually acknowledging, okay, well.
But that's mindfulness.
Yes.
You realized what your mind was doing to you, and you never asked it to do that. You didn't give it permission to do that. It's been built to do that. But you didn't you didn't give it permission. It's doing the way it's been built. But then you see that and you say, okay, I don't like that brain setting. I'm going to change it.
Yeah, exactly. And the way that I do it now is I write down all the good things that happened in the day to try and make me connect with the things that did happen in the day that were good, as opposed to just the one thing that happened that was bad. And there's days when everything seems to just go wrong. And we all have those days. But I think connecting to the good parts, and I guess gratitude has come up a lot in the last few years. And this, to me, connects a lot with compassion.
Yeah.
On the gratitude side of things. So you mentioned it earlier, and I want to make sure we don't skip over it, which is compassion-focused therapy. Yeah. Now, people might not have been aware that there was a certain therapy. I think people can get very lost when entering the world of therapy.
Yes.
Because there's so many different types out there. And unless you're in it, it can feel like a minefield of, well, what do I really need?
Yes.
So when could CFT, compassion-focused therapy, really come into place for people? And who is more likely to connect with this more?
Everybody can benefit from CFT. Okay? Everybody. The same with cognitive therapy. Everybody can benefit from being a bit more mindful and paying attention and not getting carried away by negative thinking. Everybody can benefit from that. Everybody can benefit from knowing a little bit more about what's going on in the unconscious, maybe. So, everybody can benefit from getting a bit fitter. Mm-hmm. So these are things that are not exclusively, because the compassion focused therapy, like other therapies, is really about helping people with their minds, and we could all do that, can't we, a little bit?
Yeah.
So the key, we call it compassion focused therapy because we focus a lot of the interventions that other therapies use, but with compassion, right? Now, this is partly how I kind of discovered, it would be too strong a word, but came across it. So in cognitive therapy, many people have heard of cognitive therapy. What you do is you identify a series of negative thoughts associated with whatever. Now, people who are depressed tend to have negative thoughts about themselves and their future and the world and that sort of thing. And so you get them to stand back. So they might say, look, I'm a failure. I haven't achieved anything. And, last week I lost my job. And you can help them look at that and say, well, what's the evidence for that? Well, actually, the job was downsizing anyway. And, well, I have had jobs before and I've got good friends. Great. How does that feel? That makes a lot of sense. Does it feel any better? No. So that's what was happening with my class. No. So I said to them, oh, all right. So how do you hear them in your mind then, when you look at the fact that actually it wasn't your fault you lost your job because they'd been downsizing, and also you've got good friends that are supporting you and there's a possibility of another job, blah, blah. How are you hearing that in your mind? Can you speak it out to me? And I was amazed, and they said, well, I'm doing cognitive therapy. So, you're doing cognitive therapy, aren't you? It wasn't your fault. You know it wasn't your fault. They were downsizing. You knew that all the time. Why are you blaming yourself? I said, whoa, hang on a minute. They said, yeah, I've got to convince myself. I've got to show that I can look at it in a different way. And I started to ask other clients, when you're trying to be supportive, understanding and helpful to yourself, how do you hear it in your mind? And they're all the same. Either they were cold, pay attention to the evidence, you know this isn't true, right? Stop it. Or they were quite hostile. I'll give you another example, actually. One of the things you do in cognitive therapy is when people are laying in bed ruminating about getting up in the day, you invite them to get up. So this, again, many years ago. So I had this one lovely lady, actually, and she hated being depressed. She hated her depression. She'd wake up and think, oh, you're depressed again. She'd be really angry. So we said, okay, what are you going to do? You're going to get out. You're going to do a few yoga moves. We showed her a few yoga moves, and then you're going to go make a cup of tea, and you're going to focus on enjoying your cup of tea, right? Yes, she said. So going to give you a note to put on the side of your bed. Right, she said. So as soon as you wake up, no laying in bed, ruminating about how bad you feel. Yes, she said. So I put this note on the side of the bed. She comes back the following week. So how did it go? She said, not too bad. I said, what happened? She said, yeah. She said, I looked at your note and I thought to myself, come on, get out of bed, you lazy bastard. And I said, wow. Where did that come from? And you discover that there's this undercurrent of hostility all the way through. And so the obvious thing was to say, well, what about if we just developed a kind voice and really focus on the motivation and understanding that the depression has been horrible? And the client said, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. That's ridiculous. That's pathetic. That's soft. That's weak. So that was the second shock. When we try to help people develop a warmer, kinder, softer, more empathic way of generating alternative thoughts than they have, they really didn't want to do it. And the third challenge was when they did start to do it, it opened up a lot of unprocessed trauma in the care system. Because if you had trauma in your attachment system, all of our motivations carry their own trauma. So, for example, if you like going on holidays and then one day you get badly beaten up and have to send home in an ambulance or something, the next time you see something about holidays, you'll immediately have that trigger. So what happens is that if children have been let down or abused or neglected in the care system has got those memories in it. So you start to tap the care system with compassion. They don't go, oh, isn't this wonderful? I now feel so much better. They feel, I feel shit, actually. I'm doing this compassion. I feel terrible. Because you're beginning to grieve. You're beginning to be in touch with the pain of never feeling loved. You're beginning to be in touch with that sense of loneliness. You're remembering what's your care system holds inside for you. So we need to help heal that care system. And that's why that then takes us into the courage and wisdom to be able to work with the pain that's arising when you become compassionate.
Wow. I think actually knowing that you could start to feel better before you feel worse is actually a really critical point when we're talking about compassion work, because there can be this like idealistic view that actually, well, I'm going to do this and I'm going to feel great.
No.
And if we can have the opposite reaction, it can become even more fearful for people.
Yeah.
A personal question.
But that's the point of the therapy in a way.
Yeah.
Of having the therapy that holds you in that process. Because when people begin, I mean, a lot of the people that I work with over many years, they have a deep, deep inner loneliness and desperate and just hoping that they can do the right thing or be in the right way or look the right way or whatever. And they don't want the dark side. They don't want to have to face anger because that makes them unlovable. So it's very, very tough.
Do you think a lot of this work, whether you feel more connected to it or more fearful of it, or the word that I use a lot is disconnected, stems from how you were brought up in childhood?
Yes, a lot of it. Not all of it. Some of it is cultural, but a lot of it, yeah.
And I know that you spoke, not on this show, but I've obviously listened to you speak elsewhere, but you went to boarding school.
I did.
How much of an impact did that play in your kind of growing up?
Oh, massive.
Just because my natural response is thinking that you're not at home in a care system just because from what you were saying. Is there a difference between people that go to boarding school and people that have a home upbringing in their sense of compassion?
Well, yes, I think it's a great question, Sarah, because, like with everything, these life events can push you in different ways. And some people who go to boarding school close down their emotions, they close down their empathy, and they go into politics. I'm afraid they do. Whereas other people have they develop their empathic sensitivities. I mean, they can go into politics too, right? But they can struggle against the others. So, yes, I think so. Because I became very sensitive, because I became what's called a dormitory prefect and things, looking after the younger ones, became very sensitive to some of the sadnesses that the younger ones have with homesickness and stuff. We used to talk to them and things, So I'm sure it did sensitize me that way.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting concept, because I think so many times we can connect to ourselves right now while we're struggling, but I guess the real important thing that happens in CFT is going back.
Yes, because a lot of people say, well, what makes you compassionate? And I say, absolute rage. What do you mean? Isn't it love? No, it's rage.
Explain.
Well, because I was brought up in a very Christian sort of background, blah, 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 and then became aware of Jung, and then from Jung became aware of evolutionary science, that actually the reality of biological life is pretty awful. I mean, 99% of all species are gone, right? What we call Mother Earth has been very hostile to life, actually. There's been 5 mass extinctions on this planet. As I say, all life has to eat other life forms. Viruses, diseases, parasites. They're part of the life process. We've just gone through COVID. Just took out millions of people just out of nowhere got took out, lost family, lost fathers, lost, partners, lost children. Life is horrific, actually, I think. And you just get used to being here, and then off you go. Everybody has to face the reality of decaying and dying. So, and this is a Buddhist position, by the way. The Buddha said exactly the same thing. The Buddha did not like biological life. He did not think biological life was a good thing at all. He thought it was a complete illusion. And as you probably know, when the Buddha had his experience, he had an experience of enlightenment, that actually consciousness is beyond the brain. In a way, the brain is trapped, or traps consciousness. So consciousness is more cosmic, really. And therefore, a lot of what the Buddha was talking about is learn to control your brain. I mean, he didn't put it that way, obviously, because your brain will screw you. Biological systems will screw you, right, if you're not careful. So I just see the awful suffering that goes on. And humans are, as we've mentioned, a really nasty species. We are a vicious species. If you look at what's happened over the last 10,000 years with our wars and our tortures and, crucifixions, crucifying people to kill, really doing everything you can to extend suffering when you want to kill somebody, the gladiatorial games, the way women have been treated. I mean, look what's going on in some parts of the world, in certain religious communities, Afghanistan and so on, what's going on in the Middle East now. I mean, those are wars of hatred. Once you've got hatred, humans are in a serious, serious trouble.
But then you could also flip and say that we are also, I do believe in a lot in kindness and empathy and hope and goodness with people.
Absolutely.
And all the kind of courage that can come out from them as well. Yes. So I think we have 2 very distinct areas, and it depends which way we go.
Yes,
which is critical.
That's right. Did you ever see Lord of the Rings?
Yes, I did, all of them.
All right.
All 4.
Do you remember Gandalf?
I do.
Thou shalt not pass. That's a very archetypal position. No. No to suffering. No to hatred. No. Thou shalt not pass. So for me, that's a really archetypal thing. But it's that real determination. It's that real rage. You will not get through. And when we take that sort of recognition, actually, of real determination, we do not want to allow this to continue. Mm-hmm. This must not be allowed to continue. Unfortunately, what's gone on in the Middle East, they've just continued and continued and continued. There's some fantastic research on peace studies, looking at what happened in Europe and so on. We know how to create peace.
Yeah, this is part 2, Paul, for the podcast.
Yeah. I mean, the point about it is compassion can be nice, that we love and all that stuff. But from my point of view, compassion is absolutely determination that in the face of the reality of suffering of life, we say, no,
Yeah.
I do not want this. I want to create something better.
Well, I really hope that people can take from this that so much about compassion is about courage.
Courage, yeah.
Right? Compassion and courage, the two C's that go together. And if you're clever, the third C, I think there's an understanding that also it could make you happier. And I know that you can speak about that a lot. And a lot of us are trying to always strive to how to have a happier life, or how can I be happier? And I believe happiness is fleeting.
Yes.
It's not something that's static. It's not something that once we get there, it's a fleeting thing. But how can compassion make us happier?
Compassion can make you happier because it puts you in touch with something important within you. What do I mean by that? Okay. Imagine that you're going to a party tonight. You've been looking forward to this. It's your best friend's engagement or something very special, and it's going to be great. All your good friends are going there. But then another friend phones you up and says they're in a terrible state and they really need to see you. Could you come and spend some time with them tonight? What do you do?
What do I do?
Well, not.
What do I do?
You don't need to, I'm sure.
I'm thinking, what is all the listeners going to say? I think I know what I would do, but.
And I think a lot of people, if you really cared about that person and they really, you're aware that you were the only one or whatever, you can set it up in any way you want. But the point about it is you would probably forgo the happiness and the great fun of the party to be with your friend. And that means your evening would be miserable because you're now with somebody who's miserable. So you've given up opportunity to joy in order to be miserable. But how will you feel in 6 months' time? How will you feel in 6 months when that person says to you, you know what? You've really helped me now. You've helped me. Knowing that you were there, it just changed things for me. How are you going to feel now?
Great.
That's happiness.
Mm.
See, that's a type of happiness. Happiness that comes from the giving, the sharing, the being there for other people. That's a form of happiness.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But it's also a very big way to increase your self-worth.
Yes, because it's meaning for you, doing things that are meaningful. I mean, the party would be great and you'd have a great time, you'd be very happy. That type of happiness, though, is, as you say, fleeting. You know, eating the extra piece of chocolate cake, it's great. Having that extra glass of wine, great. But actually, the real happiness comes from doing things that are close to your values and are meaningful to you. Mm-hmm. It's all about meaning, you know. Mm-hmm. You probably know the stuff that was done on in the Holocaust and people finding happiness in meaning. What is meaningful to you?
And for you, how has your relationship changed with compassion itself? What's your journey been like with this?
My compassionate self? I'm still fighting with my tendency to take on too much and then get irritated. That's it's my Achilles heel. I get irritated because I can't do all the things I want to do. And when things don't work in the way they should do, I'm pretty intolerant of things not working when they should work. So I'm trying to do that, because if you talk to my wife, she says, oh, well, you're just a grumpy old man, really. So I'm trying to be better paced, I think. Try and pace my life better now. Try to come to terms with the fact that I'm not 20 years younger, and that I find that difficult. I have to slow down, and coming to terms with, as I say, taking on too much and getting irritated. Those sort of things. So we've all got our foibles, haven't we? We've all got our personality glitches here, there, and everywhere that we have to kind of work with, really.
What do you do to keep yourself in check with compassion apart from mindfulness?
I think I mean, it's going to sound very narcissistic, I suppose. I feel very privileged in lots of ways of being able to do this work. It gives me a lot of meaning. And if I can help bring more compassion into the world, particularly helping people understand what it is, it's a courage and wisdom. And if we all got together and say no to suffering, whether it be within ourselves or what we see other humans doing to other humans, I think we would make a huge. But it's this preparedness to do it, because it takes courage, to do that, to say no, this must stop.
Yeah, well, it takes courage to have a voice.
And it takes courage to have a voice, yes.
which is really essential. If there's one thing that you would like people to take from today, from our conversation, what would it be?
That you can be angry at life, okay? You can see life for what it is, okay? But you can also take joy, great joy, and you can also be interested in what's coming, okay? Because we are living in an age now like no other, okay? And it's all on the internet. You can see it. You can listen to people like Donald Hoffman. We're beginning to realize that this world that we live in, it's not what we think it is, not at all. All the physicists are now telling us that time and space is a creation. It doesn't actually exist. That what we take to be real, it's a creation of our brains. We are living at a time of the most extraordinary discoveries about the relationship of consciousness to matter. Now, that's way beyond my pay grade, I have to say, but it is just the most amazing thing. So as a species, right, we've used our intelligence to do horrible things, but we can also use our intelligence to discover some wonderful things.
That's very powerful, Paul. So it leads me to my last question, which is, what does live well, be well mean to you?
Oh, what a wonderful question. It is a wonderful question. To live well, obviously, for me, is to live compassionately, to realize that through no fault of my own, us humans, we can do some terrible things, blah, 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 blah. But we can also help to see how we can say no to those terrible things without blaming or shaming or criticizing or whatever, but actually gearing the world to a better place. We can understand why people do terrible things, because they get threatened or they feel deprived or they feel entitled, all that stuff. So living well is living to your values. That's the Steve Hayes sort of view, isn't it? I don't know if he's had Steve. He'd be good for you. But living to your values. And of course, for me, they're not any values. They're compassion values. And so living well is live to compassion values, because that would be good for you. It'd be good for your brain. It'd be good for your relationships. It'll be good for your sense of meaning and purpose in life. In fact, there's not one thing it won't be good for, actually. And if you live with compassion, then you will create an immune system and a brain system and a cardiovascular system that will help you to stay well. It won't keep you well, but it can help you to stay well. So compassionate mind is a mind that's more likely to create the physiological conditions for wellness.
Paul, I obviously could not agree more, having a lot of my work focused on this. So it's been a real pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.